What if the biggest risk in your business isn't actually sales, strategy, or talent, but a supply chain quietly falling apart behind what appears to be always green KPIs? In this episode, I sit down with Brent Hagan. He's the Chief Supply Chain Officer at LOP. He used to work for Amazon and also has done a successful startup exit. Together, in this Business Emergency Room episode, we will unpack the early warning signs, the hidden costs, and why fixing problems upstream or moving them upstream can create brand new ones downstream. If you are one of those who always relies on operations to figure it out, do the juggling, and close the gaps, you'll want to hear this one. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here today. I have a great guest today. We're going to talk about a subject we have sideways touched on in this podcast frequently, but actually never really gone into in depth. Today, I have an expert here on anything supply chain operations, logistics. With me today is Brent Hagan. He's the Chief Supply Chain Officer at LOP. He actually is an exiter, as we call it. So he's exited a startup before and has experience in that space too. He's worked with Amazon and many other organizations. Today's topic is around resilient supply chains and building bridges between traditional operations and SaaS innovation, scaling logistics, and anything around that. Welcome, Brent.
Thanks for having me today. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here too. Having experienced an exit and having worked with a business that scaled like no other, right? Amazon, and working in the space you're in. Can we maybe start with some of the symptoms? What in your experience are some of the symptoms that specifically your supply chain might be, or your supply chain management might be one of the main culprits why your business is hurting and not functioning as it should? What are the things that you see in organizations that really have issues in that space?
Yeah, I was just talking to an e-commerce company about this yesterday, actually, a really large one who I don't think would appreciate me sharing their name, but they're operating as a third party provider to another large e-commerce company. And one of the pieces that they were bringing up as a part of their contractual arrangement, obviously they have a certain amount of outbound capacity and replenishment that needs to go downstream to the third party that they're supporting. And for a long time, they weren't meeting those needs. And so it's like, that's your customer's main KPI for sure. And so at that point, they're left with the decision tree of, do we increase our cost basis to meet this outbound capacity that is what our relationship is predicated on, or do we renegotiate? And I think and at that point, it's like, it's a death sentence, right? Like they're going to find another partner to manage that relationship. So they did what I think most businesses would do. They said, let's go and increase our variable cost, which really directly tied back to headcount, to increase our capacity, and we'll work on the back end over time. And so now they're taking a step back and saying, what are our overall throughput rates? What's broken within our headcount assumptions? How do we reduce that overall variable cost and increase their efficiency? And they're doing all of those things. And the question that I asked him was, and this was with the CFO, I was like, what if your cost structure was just bad? Right? Like you started off on the basis of, we think it's going to cost this much to service this level of volume, and you're not hitting that. then what are you going to do? And he's like, we're thinking about that, and that's going to lead us to having significantly different problems to solve. And so, I think it depends on, are you finding these problems on your own, or is the customer servicing them for you? Right? Like those are
Oh,
very
yeah.
different problems, and they have very different expectations, especially around the timeliness in which you're going to resolve them.
Yeah, so lots of stuff in there. So what I'm hearing is, which totally resonates with me, is somehow supply chain feels like the one that's so visible, right? Because there is a feedback loop, because there's so many more parties involved,
Yeah.
and then the problem being moved upstream. And in your example, they very consciously decided to move the problem upstream, right? To start supplying this customer as contractually committed, or whatever the arrangement was. But
Yep.
then you're taking that problem somewhere else in your organization where you need to fix it. And you can totally see how in any day-to-day operations there's lots of little one of these situations that if that doesn't end up in a bigger pot, you don't see the little symptoms where there's in so many places, earlier, probably in your example, there were earlier signals that structure wasn't helpful, or wasn't working, or wasn't delivering. And only when there is a really big client and systemic underperformance does it hit a bigger radar, right?
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely. I mean, especially when you look at this time of year, the most likely scenario is that on day one, month one, even quarter one, it's like, well, we're not hitting our output rate. That's okay, because they're not putting a tremendous amount of stress on the system, because everything is ramping in those sort of launch
yeah,
scenarios.
we're just getting started. It's just we need to work the kinks out of the system.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then, but you look at e-commerce fulfillment right now, what's happening? Everyone's entering peak season. They're a week away from having their inventory steadily decline, when over the last probably 90 days, their inventory has been steadily increasing, and they're shifting that volume out, and they're fueling replenishment. And so that's what's going to begin to stress your system. And I think the commonality there is taking it away from e-commerce and just focusing on businesses in general, is that everyone has like those code red moments of like, hey, stuff's really getting ready to hit the fan, and we have these key signals. I think the difference is between, are we going to recover, or are we going to collapse, is whether you rely on people to get their way out of it, which is what this company decided to do, at least for the short term, or how can we build systems in place on the front end to be the shock absorber and avoid these diving catches that so many of us who work in operations have become just really, really great at over time, because we've had to.
Yeah, this makes me think of a colleague I had I was working for an oil major in Aberdeen, so the coast of the North Sea, and we had a guy who used to work offshore as a diver. We all called him Phil the plumber, and there was files and spare parts that he knew where they were, including things sitting in his office that others didn't, right? And I was just thinking earlier this week, how would you AIify Phil the plumber? Because there's so much sometimes in people's heads, and dependent on these key individuals, which might make your business successful, but sustainable, it's not, huh?
Oh, 100%. I've spent most of my career deploying Lean Six Sigma principles really globally, and across a number of different both business and operational supply chain settings. One of the pieces that I talk to everyone about is because everyone wants to apply Six Sigma, which without realizing that that's really like a set of tools in the toolbox that has one name tied to it. And all of it is tied around analytics and looking for trends within data. Well, if you haven't done the very basics of lean manufacturing, whether that be visual controls, 5S, standard work across the system, and so you have continuity across that system from person to person, from shift to shift, from business unit to business unit, what good is your data? It's not. Your data is not any good.
Yeah.
So how are you going to trigger something? Trigger
Yeah.
that alarm that we're talking about, and
Yeah.
that's what
Automate, and
drives
you're
the hero
automating
ball.
the existing chaos, huh? And
Yeah.
the
Yep.
existing
Exactly.
dysfunction. Um, you have worked in fast growing businesses. You've done a startup with an exit. If I'm in a business that's about to pivot or grow, or really, take a leap to different levels, What are some of the things, it's a bit of a world peace type question, but what are the things to consider if you're framing your logistical setup and you want to at least put some bare bone controls in place, or you're thinking about how do I define success, what I'm building? Can you give us some ideas or tips or tricks on how do you think smartly to what is too much at once or too ambitious? What are some of the questions you need to think about there?
Yeah, I think when you go back to a founder's mentality, so often after having a great um, initial idea and product that they're beginning to sell, they often want to go to that second act, as quickly as possible. And it's highly likely that second act is what's going to get them sold. And everyone's going to say, okay, great, they're not just this one thing, but look, like there's this big thing. And often that can come at the expense of the first act because of the prioritization of where these leaders that built this great product are spending their time. And so I like to think of it as how do we begin to optimize this first act in a way that allows you to go spend your time somewhere else. And that's what I think the second act should be. And that's really how I've began to approach that. In fact, that's what we're doing at Lob right now.
Okay, and so is there also then some reality to the fact that what you made work for the first act, or what is working for the first act, might also be very much dependent on the relational capital, as I call it, right? Because that's been your first strategic product. What I often encounter is that there is a lot of relationships that have been built underpinning that growth and the development of that business, and everybody felt vested and interested. But then the second act might not have the same players, or might not have the same value to all the same players on the first act. And so you're overestimating what's possible, because in the first act, a lot of stuff was possible because, again, people closed gaps and were willing to live with things that they maybe wouldn't consistently work with for something that's not a first of its kind, or new, or very opportunistic.
Oh, that's absolutely true. If I'll take Lob as an example of that. So Lob was the original API in the direct mail industry. And as a result of that, and our focus on technology versus fixed infrastructure, we spent every dollar expanding our technology and not wanting to apply cash into managing fixed assets like print equipment, logistics network, and that sort of thing. That became a very different mental model for how we treated the industry versus most. And on the way to doing that and setting up this robust third-party manufacturing network, we kind of over a 12-year period accidentally became like a really great supply chain company. And so I've been with Lob for almost 3 years now, and entering into like my second year, maybe like 18 months into the role, I was talking to our CEO and I was like, there's a lot of opportunity to apply this same technology throughout the rest of the value chain. And yes, it'll extend out our customer base. I actually think that that's a favorable piece, to the point where we've now launched a new business, which is our second act, called Lob Logistics, where our customers are actually the print manufacturers that have been supporting our network for a really, really long time. And it's all built on the back of technology that already existed. But it's a completely new revenue stream with a completely new customer base. But it's an area in which we're entirely comfortable in operating because we know the players so well. And yes, to your point, like it is the revenue is fractional compared to the first act in which we've built, but it's made a much more robust product for us. And it's also allowed us to control more segments of the value chain for our original customers, as well as lower our unit economics. So, all of those things inherently tied together. And yeah, there's a lot of different players working in it now, but all of those pieces tied together really, really make for a robust company.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that effectively there is not necessarily a right answer, right, about who you keep around or what decisions you make, but you need to be aware and you need to effectively revisit your whole stakeholder mapping and say, hey, how with this expansion does it change how my partners are in this collaboration? And am I aware that that may impact the delivery I get from them or the way I work with them, or even jeopardize the core business I had, right? And my business to
Yeah, absolutely.
maintain and not run into business continuity issues. Switching gears a little bit to a different side of the table. Typically what I see on boards, operations expertise, supply chain expertise is frequently underrepresented, but especially in companies where that's not the core IP or the core of who they are, but simply a function that's needed in the business. If I'm What are some of the questions as a board member or somebody who maybe does due diligence or who is looking at a partner or is trying to help a business grow or is even looking at their own business and that's not their own background, right? What are some of the questions or things to go looking for or ask about that maybe don't show up in the typical standard reports that anybody sees, right? Delivery times or KPIs are there, but beyond the traditional KPIs, what are some of the questions you should ask of an operations lead or logistics lead to get a feel for what's going on?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, I really want to look out for who's the key decision makers within the business and get a really crisp answer of who's solving problems and at what level. Yeah, I think oftentimes, especially if you're doing M&A activity on businesses that have historically been like sole proprietors or something like that, you now have to live in a situation in which the owner of that business probably pretty likely is making that entire thing run. And so that's going to be a key risk that obviously has to be evaluated. I think there's a lot to unwind as it relates to core KPIs and their performance against them as well. And that could be something as easy as on-time delivery, right? Like, how are you measuring on-time delivery? And if they're measuring it, oh, well, this is when it leaves like our dock door. And it's like, well, who contracts the truck? And it's like, oh, well, we do. Who's ensuring that it's delivered to the customer? Oh, well, we do. Does the customer ever escalate when it's arriving to their door? Oh yeah, all the time. Well, that's not on-time delivery, right? Like, that's not you servicing your customer's needs. So I think not just understanding performance as it relates to the key KPIs that the company you're looking at is set, but also the key definition of what success looks like. Because that's going to tell you a lot. I mean, I was involved in M&A activity a number of years ago, where we were looking at forecast accuracy and it was 99% forecast accuracy every single month, every single quarter. And I'm like, that's not really like, let's start from a basis of like, that's true. And it's like, how have you become that successful? And what we found was that their forecast accuracy was reflective of their ability to reforecast as the time was going on. So the thing that they presented to the board a quarter ago, and it's like, well, the data changed, so we changed the expectation, and we were right on that reforecast. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily how that works, right? Like, and what's causing that variability? And that's going to tell us a lot both about our sales team. It's going to tell us a lot about our operations team and their ability to meet a demand forecast. It's going to tell us a lot about our customers and their willingness to work with us on when they plan on doing large works that's going to materially change forecast. Like, all these things open up a whole new realm of questions that all started from like, this looks like a good number, but why is this a good number? Tell me about this number. So I think just having that inquisitive mindset is immediately going to put people in a great position for success.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, if you're not hindered by subject matter expertise, the age-old adage of how do you know, right? What's the definition of success, and how do you really know that you're this good? What's the next level down that you look at? are great questions to ask. And I think if you're in those seats, you're a good enough judge of what answer you're getting and whether it's a waffle or actually some true content. I love actually that you started with decision making, because I think particularly those of us who are not used to managing supply chains and external partnerships, there is sometimes an over reliance on the ability to fix things internally, or there is an experience of how things are fixable internally. That's just simply not true for any things that happen at the interfaces, right? And so, we talk plenty of this on this podcast about difficult conversations. Internally, it's never good to leave those too long. But if you are working in a partnership, you definitely have no time, because then the story becomes two entirely different things on both sides, but nothing happens unless you engage and have the conversations, right? And so your question around the decision, I remember we talked about it, the gin and tonic set, right? So in oil and gas, you can imagine there is the Halliburtons, the Schlumbergers, and then there's the oil majors, and they all work with each other on every continent on hundreds of projects and lots of operating units in different ways and shapes. But between those organizations, there was the gin and tonic set was identified, right? So allowing, if really need be, that slowly there was escalation levels to bring things higher up the chain and to get things resolved. And those names and individuals were identified, and those people occasionally met. So it wouldn't be the first time they would meet, wouldn't be over the resolve of a challenge, but actually both sides had a good idea of what was going on and where the relationship stood, so that by the time there was a need to escalate, it wasn't entirely out of the blue, right? Yeah. And I think that's a critical part of your business controls that you want to have in place on all your relationships, right? Not just your supply chain relationships. Any strategic relationships need some clarity about where, if things start to fall apart, what then happens? Where do you go?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I have a concept that I've applied across my team, but across the broader business, including, with your existing customer base, this should extend to there as well. And that's the idea that I want them to reject the idea of failure as being final. Every miss is a new iteration that we're learning from. And so what I really want them to do is focus on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis of what went right, what went wrong, and what did we learn from that, and what are we doing differently next time as a result. Like those sort of concepts across every partnership is absolutely critical. It goes back to the forecast accuracy thing that I was just talking about. Like it feels great to say 99% forecast accuracy. All that really means is that we're probably not going to pay attention to that number because it's green. It's okay for a number to be red, but we should be talking about what drove that number to miss our expectations, right? And it's the same conversation with a customer. Like, how are we not meeting your expectations? What are the things that we've deployed in the last 6 months that you've enjoyed versus we're challenging within our relationships? Like you're going to learn from all of those things.
Yeah. Well, we also all learn the hard way, especially those in operations and in supply chain, that unfortunately many other internal departments often also can heavily influence our KPIs. Absolutely. Right? So we can, on the one hand, we can window dress all we want and make it 99% every month if we define it smartly. But at the same time, sometimes, the underperformance in these areas is also very much a factor of just mismanaged interfaces, right? So if you now have the ear of the non-supply chain leadership and the non-operational leadership, what are some of the things you can think of for somebody maybe in finance or in other departments? How can they be a better partner, a better peer to people in your part of the business? What is it that I can do today to make better friends in my supply chain and operations team?
I think the first piece is come in with some empathy for what the operator goes through, and so they are the ones that are typically responsible for doing the diving catches to save the customer expectations and the customer create healthy customer outcomes, right? Just like the initial example that I gave you, like operations didn't set that cost basis for that company, right? That's making them not be profitable as a result of that new relationship. But they sure do have to get the material out the door and figure out a way to do it more efficiently to hit that cost basis. But in terms of looking at the entire system and having the other legs of the stool sort of support the rest of the business, I think it really comes down to education around what's critical as like a finance executive sees the business, and aligning that within their peer group, especially on the operations side, and understanding from a bottoms up perspective, how can we deliver on those pieces. I think having that sort of clarity is critical across the business, as well as defining the why and why that's important and why we need to hit those certain outcomes. It's no different than I think one thing that you commonly see is HR bridging attrition. Like the HR team always seems to be the one bridging attrition, but they're not the one losing people. And so I think bringing that back to an operator who probably is, has the largest percent of headcount within the organization, next to maybe the sales team or something else, and understanding the key components of attrition, and HR providing the lens of this is how we view people leaving, right? Regrettable versus non-regrettable. All the way to our onboarding process, to how we interviewed these people, how do we select that criteria of people, all of those things, right? Like those sort of processes and clarity of thought is great within a business. That's how you know you're really high functioning.
Yeah. And the blame game is no help in there, right? Like in your example, something has been sold. That contract's in place. We can go stand on our head, but the contract's still there tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how do we work now together to dig ourselves out of this hole that we're in? Because we're all in it, right? And just saying, well, I'm not helping you dig because I didn't get us there doesn't get you out of the hole any faster.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's changed nothing. Changes nothing.
No. So, Brent, this is great. There's so much more here, but what I'm hearing is, what do you see and what do you really see? And really engaging and connecting and actually working the challenge, right? And not walking away from it. If people, after hearing you here today, want to reach out to you, want to know more about what you do, want to know more about what do they do? Where do they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Brent Hagan, Hagan. There's only a few of us on there. I'm the one that works at Lob. Feel free to reach out, make a connection, and I'm happy to talk and support anyone's business any way I can.
Great. That's a very easy one. Thank you for joining me today. I love this conversation. Thank you for some great practical tips and tactics, some good questions to take away and go and ask, and a different way for us to look at something we all sort of know something about, but also typically find quite challenging and big and incomprehensible at times, because it's such a big part of the business with so many moving parts, right? So
it is.
Definitely always plenty to triage in that space. Thank you also for tuning in to all of you listening, and I hope to have you back on an episode. This is it for today. Bye now. That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.